In today's reading, Jesus is crucified between two criminals and insulted by the Judean authorities and Roman soldiers, and even one of the criminals that he was crucified with. The inscription over his head, both his title and his crime, reads, King of Judea, of the Judeans. So it's important to note that I'm saying the Judeans and not the Jews. Many versions of the Bible translations today translate the word that is used for Judean as Jew. But as we know, Jews are a religious group. But it's important to know that Judeans weren't necessarily all Jews. They were of the nation of Judea. And Rome had a habit of identifying the inhabitants of a region by the capital of that province. So the Galileans and the Nazarenes and the Israelites, they were all classified as Judeans. Not by their religion, but where they were located. See, Jesus was from Galilee, from the north. And Judeans basically viewed people from Galilee as uncultured, uneducated, backwoods hillbillies. Or as we in America would call them, West Virginians. Thus, the conflict that we see in the Gospels isn't between Jesus and the Jews. It's between Jesus and the Judeans. The Judeans representing the collaborators, the elite of the cities, the cultured, the authorities of the capital city of Jerusalem. We're coming up against this man who was just a hayseed yokel, Jesus, from a no-name village, Nazareth, a hillbilly. But see, it wasn't a clash between Jesus and the Jews, because Jesus himself was Jewish, so that doesn't make sense. But our translators, the best way that they could describe it as King of the Jews, so they chose the Jews. The last words recorded of Jesus before he began his determined and faithful journey to Jerusalem were, "Whoever is not against you is for you." And in that context, Jesus was responding to John about someone exorcising a demon in Jesus' name. Someone who wasn't in the in crowd, someone who didn't follow Jesus around, someone who was on the outside. Presumably, the man didn't even know Jesus. Yet, he invoked his name to do good. And John tried to stop him. Jesus taught that unless a person is explicitly and consciously against him and what he stands for, that they should be presumed to be with him, with Jesus, in his company. And that's where Luke picks up his story in this gospel. Luke picks up on this theme at the end of Jesus' journey, right before he takes that step to depart on another journey into paradise. One of the criminals shows himself to be like the well-intentioned exorcist, and Jesus accepts him into the kingdom just on that basis. Throughout the Gospel of Luke, Luke likes to use irony as a technique to make points in a way that would rival even the Gospel of John. In a way, he even exceeds John by comparing the irony with sarcasm. In verse 35 of today's reading, it said that the people stood by watching. And instead of what we would get in other Gospels of a description of mockery by the passerbys, like Mark likes to exemplify. Luke records that simply the people stood watching. He resists the temptation to point out that their silence could be considered a form of consent. Instead, he appears to give them the benefit of the doubt and group them in with those who sympathize with Jesus. See, executions were very popular in those days. Undoubtedly, many people would come out for an execution. The rulers, meanwhile, scoffed at Jesus, and Luke wants to make that clear. He wants to highlight the complicity that he sees in the Judean leaders in this unjust execution of Jesus. He saved others. Let him save himself, they said. Save. That appears 3 times in this reading. Here and in a few other scriptures just right from here. And Luke wants to highlight that Jesus was crucified as a Savior. He wasn't crucified for your sin. He was crucified because of your sin. And in the taunt of these Judean leaders, we see sarcasm and irony compared and contrasted. The leaders could not be more sarcastic in what they believed when they say, let him save himself. If he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one. In other words, prove yourself to us that you are the Savior by saving yourself. And the irony could not be stronger either, because Jesus came to save others, not himself. And it was in that moment that God was working, and that's actually what he was doing. The chosen one, the Messiah of God. Sarcastically, the rulers used 2 titles that Jesus rarely used himself. They certainly didn't believe that this hillbilly blasphemer was either chosen or anointed while he was hanging on that cross. Rather, they viewed him as rejected and condemned. How dare he come up against our authority? And it's there that we find that irony, because ironically, what humans rejected, God said, no, that is my chosen. And what we humans have condemned, God has anointed. We have a habit of that as human beings. This very center, the LGBT center, represents a group of people that were rejected and condemned. And the irony that this church meets here to say, no, we have been chosen. We have been anointed by God. And see, the story doesn't stop there. That in verse 36, the soldiers offer him sour wine. This would have been wine that the common soldier would have had, as opposed to that sweet wine that you would find in the palaces. We read Jesus being offered drugged wine to help him. But he refused. And just before his death, he was given vinegar. But see, Luke alone tells us that the soldiers used it in connection with some sort of mockery of their own. See, Luke is grouping them among those who consciously are against Jesus. Possibly they are meant to represent pagans or Gentiles who, unlike the exorcist from earlier and the repentant criminal just next to him, are not with Jesus. They tell him, if you're the king of the Judeans, save yourself. Again, the sarcasm isn't lost. Pilate had king of the Judeans placed on the cross. just above his head to indicate the reason for his condemnation. He meant it sarcastically as a jibe to the Judean leaders who insisted that this innocent man be executed. An innocence that Pilate recognized. See, but the soldiers also meant it sarcastically. Ironically, an irony is a truth told without meaning. Jesus actually was the king of the Judeans, of the Jews. Of course, he chose not to come down from the cross in the way that they were challenging him. And that's why he came in the first place. And ironically, many people find him through that same cross and because of the cross. But it wasn't just the Judean authorities and the soldiers, but also one of the criminals that kept deriding him more and more. And the sarcasm from his right side came from someone in the same circumstance. Only now it's save yourself and us. This man was interested in only his fate. Not Jesus, not the other guy. He was only interested in himself. This man was not interested in Jesus, and he represents those who have never heard of Jesus but reject him. The evidence of this rejection is by the way they live their lives. They live in contradiction to Jesus. They maintain that others are to blame for everything that goes wrong in their lives. They are justified in behaving as they do because of the behavior of others toward them. We've all played that role before. I have a right to feel this way because so-and-so did this to me. Such folks have a perverted version of justice as a right to get even. Even more than even, for all the wrongs real or imagined. This criminal represents all those who have resentments of the past and hold on to them in an unforgiving manner. I will never trust that person because they lied to me one time. The evidence of one's past life does not automatically spell condemnation. See, the other criminal, to the first one, that their death sentence is a just one, unlike the middle fellow who was innocent. So we have two real criminals who deserved, under their society's rules, deserved execution, and they have the innocent in the middle. We don't know how the other criminal knew that Jesus was innocent. It's not explained, but he represents a group of people who are not consciously against Jesus, and those who do not fear the future, even at the time of their death. He wasn't required to pass a theological test to find out if he really believed that Jesus was God incarnate. He wasn't asked if he was baptized in the right way. He wasn't asked what denomination he went to. His admission of guilt and acceptance of his just punishment was the beginning of a changed heart. He understood basic human decency, and that motivated him to sympathize with Jesus. He could see the difference between himself and Jesus and the other guy. Externally, they may look the same, but he clearly knows that there's more to Jesus than meets the eye, and he has contacted that more. And it's in that moment that his heart melted. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom, he says. Amidst all the personal humiliation and mockery. Because remember, this guy is up there too. But in the midst of that, the other criminal is mocking him. Judean leaders are mocking him. And out of that, this criminal speaks to Jesus as he would a king. But more than an earthly king, he represents to be remembered even after his death. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Remember me for the good. Because when Jesus gets past all of this and sees who he really is, he sees him as a child of God. There's no question about the criminal being able to do anything to merit this gracious remembrance. He couldn't do it. He couldn't do anything to earn it. He soon will die, unable to do anything good except be a sympathetic human being to Jesus. To other human eyes, this crucified reject is anything but a king. Yet this criminal recognized that Jesus, and in Jesus, his way of dying and his way of living, he came across that knowledge, and it makes it clear to him that his life and that of every follower of Jesus transcends life and death. In verse 33, Jesus tells him, I promise you that today you will be in paradise with me. Today. A technical term. And Luke uses it to indicate that it's going to be the beginning of a new era. Jesus' death ends the old and opens up the new. And Jesus will accompany this criminal into the new age. In Luke's perspective, whenever the final coming of the Son of Man happens for the whole world, something similar happens to us. That is our goal, to be with Jesus in paradise. In today's story, Jesus certainly did not appear to be a king of anything, nor did he appear to be the savior of anyone. He appeared weak, humiliated, the very opposite of what one would expect from a king. Yet the truth and the irony of it is that there was more to Jesus than what could be seen. And only one person in this entire scene could see it. He recognized something different, something more. Without knowing exactly what that is, he responded. And that experience changed him in a way he would not be able to explain. Whatever else it was in that moment, what we do know is that it was a humane response to a wrongly defamed person. Perhaps he only intended to soften the impact of the taunts of the others. Perhaps he thought Jesus suffered from delusions, but wanted to comfort the only one the other, but wanted to comfort him while the other one added insult to injury. in being compassionate. He got more than he could ever bargain for, or ask for, or imagine. Implicitly, he recognized Jesus as his king. He made that sign become a reality. You see, king connotates monarchy or ruler. And there can only be one ruler in our lives. So each of us has to take a moment and get our butts off the throne and allow Jesus to preside over our lives and to dominate our decisions. We have to move out of the master bedroom, the center of our hearts and lives, and just make room for Jesus. Many people can't find time to make room for Jesus. See, the two criminals show us the difference in attitudes toward life. The first one, hanging on the cross in dire straits, still would not give up control. Save me and yourself. He couldn't allow Jesus to be his king. He continued to mock the others and to object to the way things really are. Amen, Lord. To the bitter end, he tried to manipulate others to get his way, even when he knew they would not. Save yourself and save us. Do it. But see, Jesus was not coming down from that cross to save anyone on their terms. He wasn't coming off that cross. Jesus had come to be our king. But to this criminal, he continued to be a gullible king, fooled by appearances. This throneless Jesus looked more to him like a joker, a jester, than a king. The other criminal was ready to give up this lie that we tell ourselves, that we have everything in control, that we can handle it, that we got this. We don't need anyone, let alone an imaginary friend that rarely talks back. He was ready to give up that ruse. He and his companion deserved what they were getting, and he admits his guilt, takes responsibility. How many know that whenever we start taking responsibility for our own actions, things in our lives suddenly start falling in place where they should be? But he doesn't just take responsibility. He takes that step, one step further, and says, I'm ready to surrender. But to who? One of the things that prevents some people from surrendering or giving up their lives, giving up control of their lives, is that they have no clue who to surrender to. There's Jesus. He surrenders to him. He dethrones himself. No royal talk like the other fellow. Only compassion. And in a moment, he abdicates control over his life and says, Lord, remember me in your kingdom. See, if a non-Christian would be able to surrender to Jesus if given the chance, why is it that Christians cannot? Many Christians like to talk a good game about how Jesus is their personal Lord and Savior. But Monday through Friday, and sometimes even on Sunday, you don't know what Jesus they're talking about. Some people have built up these thrones in their lives and have made themselves so important in their own kingdoms that we don't want to surrender First Baptist Church. We'll always live for Jesus, and I will always be the pastor. There are many pastors and preachers that talk like that. But see, the destiny of each and every one of us, whether you're here in this room or listening on the web, it transcends this life and our petty little kingdoms. And that destiny was freely granted by God Himself, who chose to be abused, who chose to subject Himself to the injustice of our world. But God who chose the downtrodden, see, God seeks out those people who abuse justice. He wants to make them whole again. He wants them to accept His offer of kingship. And Jesus offers us much more than lordship over a petty banana republic. But all we have to do is take that step. He offers us a life with Him now and in the unending future. Over the course of this Holy Week, I want you to focus on your throne, the throne in your life, and ask yourself, are you ready? Are you really ready to let Jesus be your King? Amen.